Good day, race fans. I'm Unsilent, and we're on the air with a Formula One drive-through podcast, coming to you just hours after the conclusion of the 7th round of the 2017 Formula One World Championship, the Canadian Grand Prix, a race that I hold close to my heart for obvious reasons if you're a regular on the channel, won by Lewis Hamilton. Though in the hearts and minds of the spectators, it was won by Lance Stroll. Finished ninth. Okay, I know first place for Lewis is not quite the same as the ninth place for Lance. I admit there's a little discrepancy, but we'll talk a bit more about Lance as we get along. It's his first Canadian Grand Prix. He scored his first points. I think the home fans were kind of really excited about that. Although there was a little more to be excited about. You had Sebastian Vettel starting second, dropping back to 18th and finishing 4th. There was a lot of crazy crap in the race, especially right at the start and right at the end. The middle, it just kind of played itself out while we were waiting for strategy to kind of flow through. But that start and end, Hamilton and Bottas didn't do much to make it exciting, especially after Verstappen's his battery pack for his ERS kind of quit. But anyway, enough of the preamble. Let's just go straight to today's topics. First up, it's the Canadian Grand Prix recap. Then we've got the 2018 driver market. I say driver/Perez market up on the screen, because this week we're focusing on Sergio Perez, and not just his interesting misadventures of the race, which completely changed his outlook for 2018. Well, it might change his outlook for 2018. Mercedes' future in Formula One was called into question. A couple of different reports have brought into question. And then we're going to look at another new Grand Prix for 2019. Liberty Media is looking at expanding the calendar beyond 21 races, possibly to 22 as soon as 2019. And their candidates lining up for that 22nd slot. But before we get to that, it's a recap of today's 2017 Canadian Grand Prix, won by Lewis Hamilton. Started on pole, finished in first. I'd say that was a pretty damn good race. I would have to double check. He did not Grand Slam, but I think he may have hat-tricked and led all the laps on the day. But I digress. Anyway, Hamilton wins the race from pole, 20 seconds ahead of his teammate Valtteri Bottas. Daniel Ricciardo finishes in third for Red Bull Racing Renault. The Renault engines actually did not look terrible. What did look terrible were the McLaren engines, and you could see Van Dorn finishing in 14th, and Alonso classified in 16th, and we'll get to him in a moment. It was quite a memorable end to his race. Vettel finishing in 4th, like I said, started second, dropped to 18th, finished 4th. Gorgeous race. He won driver of the day. Absolutely deserving. I know, Hamilton had a flawless race. Yeah, he did. But what pressure was he under? Vettel had to mow through a whole shed load of cars to get back to 14th. So he had a superlative drive. Sergio Perez, Checo in 5th. Oh boy, he had a very controversial race if you're in Force India. Esteban Ocon is 6th, should have been 5th. Kimi Räikkönen, brake troubles late. He should have been on Vettel's tail, but his brakes failed him, they didn't completely fail, but they were probably on the verge if they didn't do something drastic and slowed him down, basically into the clutches of Hulkenberg in 8th. Lance Stroll, as I mentioned, a very good, very smart race to 9th. He has this reputation for, not deserving to be in F1 because he's a paid driver. He has this reputation for crashing, and he had opportunities to wipe his car out and wipe other people out, and he backed out, and he played smart, and he was very, very smart. He drove a smart race, almost undone by the strategy, but it worked itself out eventually, because his strategy threw him in behind the Saubers, right? So, that is the last place you want to be, but fortunately, that Williams and Mercedes power managed to get past the Saubers and was able to help him get back to 9th eventually. So it was a very good day for young Lance Stroll. As we go on to the race recap, we'll start at the start, as one should probably do. And the start, Max Verstappen got a spectacular start. Verstappen came from P5 to position number 2 and almost got around Hamilton into turn 1. But the problem was, if you're Sebastian Vettel, you had Bottas locking up on the inside of you. You had Verstappen coming all the way around the outside of you. So he managed to get his front wing hit from both sides, but it was the Verstappen one that took out a bunch of elements on his front wing, so he had to stop after a safety car in order to get that changed to drop him back to 18th. Oh, did I say safety car? Because at turn 3, Calamity, that thing backwards on the screen, in the center of it is Carlos Sainz plowing into Felipe Massa, and then Massa, he was out. Sainz just kept carrying on into the tire wall. He was out. What ended up happening was, and as of recording, they haven't issued any penalties, stewards haven't. What happened was, going from turn 2, which is the Senna hairpin, into turn 3, which is the first left-right chicane, Sainz pinched down on Romain Grosjean, and the result was Sainz getting spun because, well, he turned into Grosjean, who was already on the grass on the inside going into turn 3. You know, this was on straight, so just spun Sainz out, and he was just going gearbox first into the turn 3 apex, and Massa was the odd one out. Grosjean had to go and pit for a front wing, came back to finish 10th. So after a couple laps, they cleared off the track, back to green flag racing. Verstappen had a look at Hamilton into the final chicane, and then compromised himself and almost lost a place to Bottas into turn 1. But, you know, they managed to hold on to it. And, well, and I say he held on to it, was only for about 7 laps before he had to pull to the side of the track, and that was day over for Verstappen. An ERS problem. His ERS battery failed on him, so that left him without drive, and they had to bring out the VSC to pull Verstappen's car back from, like, almost the apex, about halfway between turns 2 and 3, and then to wheel him downhill back to turn 2 and into the runoff area there, to the marshal's post there. So that was his day done. He was definitely, he may not have been able to hold off Bottas forever, but he was definitely on pace for a podium, so I can understand why he was so upset. Also under that VSC, there was a baseball cap underneath the bridge into the turn 8 and 9 chicane, and our boy Kevin Magnussen's like, there's a Ferrari cap on the track, can someone get it off the track? Well, they wouldn't move it under VSC, and I think Van Dorn hit it at one point with his car. I'm not sure if anyone else hit it, but it was gone by the end of the race, so I'm fairly certain somebody just plowed it out of their way with their car. From there was a lot noteworthy. Vettel pushed his way through the field. Stroll was looking very good during the day. He was moving his way up. Magnussen was looking good for some points until he got dinged for passing under the virtual safety car. Just as the VSC ended, he went and took a run at Van Dorn, and he just mistimed it ever so slightly and got ahead of Van Dorn. Tried to give him the place back straight away, but it was no doing. It was a pass under yellow, so even if he handed the place back, the stewards handed him a 5-second time penalty that he served on his pit stop. And then the second stop strategy sort of played out in the second half of the race, because about on lap 42, Raikkonen came in and he jumped onto the Ultrasofts and started putting some amazing lap times in on the Ultrasofts, right? He was looking like he was threatening for a podium at that point. Now, I remember, I said he stopped on 42, and then we're waiting for Vettel because he's getting mowed down by Raikkonen, and then it was 8 laps before they actually pitted Vettel, and he came out behind Raikkonen. So the interesting part here, from a looking ahead perspective, is Ricciardo's on the softs in third. Perez had, like, I forget how much older tires than, like, something like 13 lap older tires than Ocon. He was in fourth, and then Ocon in fifth. And Ocon's saying, can I get by him? I've got fresher tires. Perez was saying, yeah, I can get him. Ocon says, I know I can get Ricciardo. Force India just would not move Perez out of the way and get his older tires out of the way of Ocon, because Ocon would have definitely had a better chance. And what ended up happening was that it allowed Vettel to get closer and closer and closer, and Ricciardo just like, I don't need DRS to stay ahead of you guys. I'm faster than Perez, so Vettel was able to force his way by both of the Force Indias. First, Ocon with a daring move into turn 1. That was helped by the fact that Ocon couldn't get by Perez, and then he, a few laps later, got by Perez. Wasn't enough time for Vettel to catch Ricciardo, but fourth, it was a pretty good day after being 18th at one point. A couple laps to go. Alonso's car brakes, of course. You can hear it's got bits rattling around in there in the onboard. So he went up into the grandstands at turn 8 and said hi to the crowd. Got some pictures taken, threw his gloves into the crowd. It was fantastic. It was just like, you learn so much from doing the Indy 500. You're going to be like, Fernando's going to be everyone's favorite driver Well, at least among the fans, he's going to be their favorite driver because he's the best guy that they got right now. He might be the most talented. He's certainly one of the most friendly. So I think Alonso certainly picked up a few lessons from his trip to America for the 500. But that would be all we had time for in this race. 70 laps came and went pretty damn fast, with Mercedes scoring their first 1-2 of the season, Ricciardo scoring his third straight podium, and that was the dullest part of the race. Well, okay, Ricciardo was pretty interesting. Ricciardo had an interesting day, but the rest of it was kind of dull. But once again, there's the results for you on the screen. Hamilton, Bottas, Ricciardo, Vettel, Perez, Ocon, Raikkonen, Hülkenberg, Stroll, and Grosjean, your top 10 and scoring points on the day. On to the World Driver Standings. Down to 12 points for Vettel. It was damage mitigation because early in the race it would have been dead heat at the top, and now it is just 12 points. But, that's still a workable gap, a defendable gap for Vettel right there. And then you've got Bottas, Hamilton. Verstappen might be the big winner of the day by being the big loser of the day. It sounds counterintuitive, but if you consider that last week's report from Sayward that said one of the conditions for the performance clause in the Red Bull contracts is top 5 in the World Drivers' Championship, well, Max, who is coveted by Ferrari, and I assume Ricciardo would be as well, but Max, who's coveted by Ferrari, if the Sayward reports from last week were right about what the performance clause was, and Max can break it because he's not going to be the top 5 of the World Drivers' Championship, well, then all of a sudden, this was the best result he could have had because now he can dump out to Ferrari. Now, speaking of the driver market for 2018, Renault is already looking ahead to 2018. We talked about last week how Jolyon Palmer's immediate future is in question. Well, Renault is already looking ahead to next season, regardless of what happens this. So let's make the safe assumption Palmer isn't going to be there next season at Renault. Who's coming in? Well, reports say that once again they're going to make a play for Sergio Perez. I guess it's going to be a reunion with the Hulk. It's the third straight year in which Perez and Renault have been linked. He very nearly jumped there in 2016. See, this image on the screen was something he had tucked away on his website in case he decided to go with Renault, and he would put that up on his website to reveal his decision. And last year they were talking to Checo again for 2017, and now they're hoping it's third time lucky in their pursuit of Perez. Now keep in mind, Perez is also considered candidate to join Ferrari. If Verstappen does not make that move to the Scuderia, Perez is probably the next in line. The other thing to keep in mind is Perez, by not just moving over for Ocon, probably did not impress Renault and Ferrari with his ability to be a team leader. He will need to get his head wrapped around, if you're not faster than your teammate, move aside for the good of the team. And if he does not demonstrate that at some point soon, then the Ferrari offer or the Renault offer might be a little more reluctant in coming, or might come with a far more stringent clause on team orders. Now, if Perez does not go to Renault, they have previously targeted Valtteri Bottas, who's likely to stay at Mercedes, and Carlos Sainz, who is like third option for that Ferrari seat, and they've targeted those guys as recently as last year. They also have Sergei Sirotkin in GP2, who wouldn't be a particularly bad final option. There's a domino effect from Perez's move. If he goes to Renault, that would be interesting. Force India's development driver is Alfonso Celis, but he isn't particularly quick enough or experienced enough to warrant that jump into Formula One. If Bottas stays in Mercedes, you've got an open spot at Williams if Massa does not retire. He says that he would be fairly comfortable staying around for another season. So it's entirely possible that Williams would be more than happy to keep him on if they can't get Bottas back for 2018. So you might have an open seat at Williams, and you will have an open seat at Force India for Perez if he goes to Ferrari or Renault. Now, there's only one Pascal Wehrlein to fill a Mercedes vacancy. You also have Pierre Gasly, who might play a factor in this, not by going to Renault, by going to Ferrari, by going to Force India or Williams. No, Gasly would go to Toro Rosso. Daniel Kvyat would probably be the odd one out, assuming that Carlos Sainz doesn't move and Gasly doesn't fill in for Kvyat's seat. And that would open up Kvyat for new full-time employment next season. And that could be with a Williams or Renault or Force India. So you've got a lot of moving parts there for last season. And I keep talking about, is Vettel the domino? Is Raikkonen the big domino? Is Alonso, Bottas? Perez and Verstappen could be the two that you have to keep your eyes closest on. Because if Verstappen moves, okay, Sainz gets bumped up to the big team, and that opens up a seat for Gasly, and now we have to see where things trickle out from there. Does Massa retire? Well, that opens up a whole new raft of possibilities. Does Perez stay? Does Perez go? If Perez stays at Force India, that makes things a lot easier for Williams. So you've got a lot of moving parts, and when we see the first one fall, and we see who is moving where, that is when the rest of this season kind of plays out, and we'll figure out what's happening for the driver's market for 2018. Now, Eddie Jordan got himself in a spot of hot water with Mercedes. At Monaco, Eddie, in an interview, said he expects Mercedes' board of directors to pull the plug on the team and continue as an engine manufacturer after the 2018 season. His logic being that Mercedes uses this as a marketing exercise and it only works when the team is winning or dominating the sport. Now, they're in contention for a World Drivers' Championship now and a World Constructors' Championship now, but they aren't dominating, so is it really as effective use of hundreds of millions of dollars of marketing? Now, Mercedes team boss Toto Wolff says the team has contracts to stay in the sport until 2020 and says that Mercedes' participation in discussions for the next engine formula shows its commitment. Well, if we dissect Toto's statement, engine discussions mean nothing since Eddie says they're going to stay on as an engine supplier. And as for contracts to stay in the sport, the old joke is that in Formula One, contracts aren't worth the paper they're written on. And I'd imagine if Mercedes could sell the team and they continue operating, that there probably aren't going to be too many legal worries from said contracts. Now, that isn't the only time in the last 2 weeks that Mercedes says we've got contracts in place, because Joe Sayward has a little note on his blog talking about political turmoil in Malaysia, saying that it may result in Mercedes losing its title sponsors. Sayward says that Petronas, which is a Malaysian government-owned oil and gas company who's the title sponsor of Mercedes, may soon end its sponsorship of Mercedes. Mercedes says they have a contract with Petronas for next 10 years, or it was a 10-year contract extension that was signed in 2014, which brings us through 2023, 2024, thereabouts. So when the deal was first signed, it was worth $30 million a year in 2010. 3 championships later, I'd imagine it'd be considerably higher now since Mercedes is premium sponsorship, and they're one of the top 2 teams at every race since 2014. If you're a government that's kind of like, the people aren't happy with us, we have to find money to save somewhere, that would be one of those places. Not all governments want out of Formula One, though. We just saw that the Canadian government's committed another almost $100 million to the Canadian Grand Prix and will keep it in Montreal through 2029. But the government of Portugal might be looking to get back in Formula One. With the new leadership in Formula One from the Liberty Media, new circuits are looking to jump into Formula One because they're going to be trying to make it more fan-friendly, better for the circuits and whatnot. And so the latest circuit to throw some interest in and talk to the folks at Liberty Media is the Algarve circuit in Portugal. It's a relatively new circuit. It's been around since 2008. It's been used for F1 testing. I think they had a European Le Mans series or some similar big sports car race there at one point. The Algarve circuit has great reviews from the racers who love the constant elevation changes, wide surface, and good overtaking opportunities. They have about 2 of them that are pretty good. If they use the chicane layout at turn 1, you've got functionally a hairpin at turn 1, and they've got another hairpin at turn 6, which would be great overtaking opportunities with or without help from DRS. Now, Portugal was one of those countries that was hardest hit by the 2008 economic crisis, but the government is believed to be in a position where they could help fund a return to Formula One. The last Portuguese Grand Prix was in 1996. It was won by Jacques Villeneuve. It was the last of 16 Formula One World Championship Portuguese Grand Prix. The final 13 of those were held at the Estoril circuit, and you'll see that coming up on the Grand Prix 2 Let's Play in a few months. If you want to revisit Estoril, cheap plug. And the last of those Grand Prix were held 12 years before the Algarve circuit was built. So it's been a long time since Formula One's been to Portugal. I know what I could tell you about the Algarve circuit. If you go back to the Holy Trinity, the first episode of the Grand Tour, then that is the circuit they are on, is the Algarve circuit. Anyway, that is all the time we have for. That's all the latest news in Formula One this week. Next time out, we're going to Baku. Well done, Baku. Yes, it will be the meme episode of the Formula One Drive-Thru podcast next time out. So that's not for 2 weeks. So thanks very much for joining me. Like the video if you liked it. Subscribe if you are new. Share on social media. Follow on social media. The social media handle is Unsilent on Air, and that's for Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Tumblr. And until the next time, I'm Unsilent. Thanks very much for joining me. Like, share, subscribe, and we will see you next time.